I differentiate education and schooling. Education's wildly personal. That's the problem. That's the disconnect.
Welcome to the podcast, Matt Beaudreau. How are you?
Great to see you, my friend. We're just saying it's been probably 2 years since we did this last. So life is good and looks like it's going well for you too. So I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, well, we're both heavily entrenched inside of the education space. You have been in it for much longer than I have. So
Yes.
can you give a little bit of a background on your experience inside of education?
Are you saying I'm an old guy? Oh, is that what's going
No,
on?
I would
I know
never.
you're not. I'll say it. I'll say it for us. It is what it is. Yeah, as far as my background in education, and again, people that listen to this, hopefully they understand, I differentiate education and schooling. Schooling to me is one very specific religion, whereas education is humans getting better, designing their lives, through to ultimately get to sovereignty and however they define that. So, basic brief background, I was a really, really good student who ended up not knowing who he was as an individual. I think a lot of people resonate with that. And so ultimately ended up at Stanford University, worked there for quite a while, went into public schools as a public school teacher and administrator, went into private schools, private school teacher and administrator, all of those in a traditional sense of what I call the conveyor belt schooling model. Decided I wasn't going to be able to stay there for my own integrity. I didn't believe in the system itself, but I surely wasn't going to send my own children to it. Decided to branch out and launch my own versions, my own campuses underneath an organization's umbrella. We launched multiple campuses there. While doing that, I also launched a speaking and consulting career. So I was traveling around and speaking with all the Fortune 500s around the world for a number of years and got to hear what they wish they saw from people that they were hiring. And so all those things were happening simultaneously. In more recent years, we've launched our own campuses underneath the Apogee umbrella, our own K through 12 campuses, but we also have mentorship programs for men and women, for young men, for young women, for home education families. We've got a university system on the way. Multiple 501c3s to help fund and make this accessible to everybody, and a payment processing system that also helps do the same. So I'm not hurting for something. Oh, and I run a farm too. We moved out of California, and now we've got a farm where we provide food to local restaurants and things too. So I'm never hurting for something to do.
I think that's absolutely incredible. I love your background as an educator and administrator, and you mentioned our last conversation. We touched on that a little bit. One of the things that I want to kind of reflect on a little bit is the idea that this question about education, this question about, how should children be educated? How should children learn? It's not a political question, right? This isn't we're not trying to play any political games. What it really is about is humanity, right? And it's really about children. And it's really about getting down to the base fundamentals. How do children learn? How should we educate children? And I think I remember you saying that one of the things that was so frustrating to you and for you being an educator was that you wanted to teach and educate in a different way than you were being told to. Was that correct?
Yeah, very much so. In the conveyor belt system, which again, I refer to the conveyor belt system as the system that the majority of us grew up in. There's grades and grade levels, and everything is taught in subjects, and you are lectured, and then you are taking the multiple choice standardized tests, and it's that, right, that I referred to. And yeah, it became very apparent that, well, that's not how humans should learn. And then as I started diving into the research, you're like, wait a second, this system is the behavioral management system, is really what it's designed, to do. And gosh, on its face, you wouldn't go, well, shoot. All right, Ella, you have to eat the exact same thing as Matt does. And by the way, there's a standardized medication that you're going to take, and Matt's going to take it too. We're not going to look at any kind of symptoms. We're not going to look at any kind of things that are going on. Just everybody takes it because you guys are the same age, and that's what medication you need to take at this age so that you can remain healthy. And if we started standardizing other things like that, we'd be like, whoa, what's going on? Shouldn't we at least see if anybody needs this medication in the first place, or even likes this food, or isn't? We'd have those conversations, but we're so indoctrinated with the religion of schooling that we don't stop to realize it's the same question. Like, hey, does this young person need it? Do they need it right now? Do they want it? Do they ever need it? Is this a skill everybody needs? Is this how to best acquire that skill? Like, none of those questions get asked. It's just blind obedience to that system. And so that's my issue with that. And that's why education is such an interesting topic. It is wildly personal. Our systems aren't built wildly personal, but education is wildly personal. That's the problem. That's the disconnect.
Yeah, and what I find fascinating there is that the idea of like, children are unique and, children are not standard. Like that's not controversial. That's not something that people don't disagree
Yeah.
with, right? But then whenever you take it the next step further where it's like, okay, well, now should they all be taught the same way? That's where there starts to become a disconnect and people start to actually have to ask the question like, okay, well, I don't know. Now, one of the fascinating things is especially today, right? The burden, there's a lot of burden on a parent. When
Yeah.
a parent decides, okay, I'm not going to send my child to school, I'm not
Right.
going to outsource this, I'm going to
Right.
actually try and create this for them. There's a
You
lot of burden to say, okay, well, how do I do this correctly? How did you figure that out over time for both your family and then also as, somebody running
Yeah.
schools?
I appreciate that you said that, and I appreciate a part of what you said is over time. So the reality is I'm still figuring it out. That's the game. People think that you figure it out, meaning you get steps 1 through 10, and you're looking for that list, and then you get the list, and you're like, good to go. There we go. There's the roadmap, and then I go, right? The reality is human growth doesn't work that way. Everybody understands it doesn't work that way, but we feel like it's supposed to for quote unquote education. Like there's a start point and there's a finish point. No, the start point is birth, the finish point is death. So if you think of it that way, it's this continuous game. It's this continuous spectrum of, well, who am I? Who am I now? Who do I want to be? What is uniquely inside of me? What is going on in the world that I want to pull into myself? How do I adapt to the way the world is changing, to my changing beliefs, to my changing desires, to the value that I want to bring in the world? It is this continuous question. So when you say that, my response is, well, I'm figuring it out now as we speak. I'm figuring out for myself, what do I want to do next? And how do I best do that? Who's done that well? How do I partner with them? How do I connect? What information do I need? What information do I discard? What information do I need to take on? But I still need this to happen. Okay, now I need to partner with somebody else to have like that. That's what I love about entrepreneurship, especially for young people, because it mirrors the moves we have to make in life. So I'm still moving myself forward. And then, hey, guess what? Because I'm moving myself forward, my own education forward in that way, because my wife will do the same. The beauty is all we do is take our kids along with us, and that educates them. It becomes normal for them. What we do, pushing our own education, becomes normal for them. And then in the process of bringing them along, we also just pay very clear attention to them. And we ask them the same questions. They're no different than us. They're people. We have this weird thing of young people, like it's like, oh, they're learning how to be a human. No, they're humans. They respond to the same things. They need the same. So it's like, cool, who are you? Who are each one of you as individuals? We're all moving along this way. This is what we're making normal in our house. So you be a part of this. G.K. Chesterton said, education is the transfer of a way of life, right? It's not about subjects. It's a transfer of a way of life. So we're transferring our way of life to them, while also just paying attention to who they uniquely are and what things they're excited about, and helping provide experiences for them in that regard so that they can continue to figure out who they are and where they want to go. None of it is actually very complicated. That's all very simple. Where we as humans tend to complicate it is to have this belief that there's a step 1 through 10 that everybody must follow, to have this arbitrary timeline that somebody else created for us that we apply, to have this fear that, oh my gosh, if I don't do it the same way Ella does, she's not going to like me anymore. She's going to think I'm weird, right? Or gosh, my friend Isaac over here, if he's doing this differently with his family, and if I'm not doing that, they're not going to want to hang out. Or gosh, my mom didn't homeschool me, and now she's mad because I'm home educating my kids, and she, like that's where we get in our own way. None of it's actually that complicated.
Interesting. Have you found that there are fundamentals? So, like, when it
Sure.
comes to educating, your kids and welcoming them into this way of life, which I absolutely love how you put that. Do you find that there are fundamentals that help them to do better? So, like, I think in
Sure.
the past, right, we have extrapolated into core subjects, right? So, like, reading, math, whatever. But what are the fundamentals that you think are the most important for a child to learn in the beginning?
It's a really good question. So there are, I think, two categories that I pay attention to as far as these fundamentals. There are the for all fundamentals and there are the for us fundamentals. And so what I mean by that is the for all fundamentals are what is really what all humans need to have to thrive, right? What do they need to thrive? All humans across the board, no matter what, what do they need? They need this, and we can go down the whole philosophical Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But eventually, what are the things that all humans really need to know? Well, you got to learn how to communicate. And each one of these things begs a definition, by the way, right? So Socrates says the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. So great communication. What does that mean? How do you actually become a good communicator? What does that look like verbally? What does that look like in a written form? Eventually, you're going to need to be able to communicate well. And so in order to do that, you've got to have some thoughts. And so, garnering thoughts from paying attention to the world, from reading great books, from having great conversations, from putting yourself in the shoes of a protagonist and going, if I make this decision, what are the ripple effects there, right? So wrestling with ideas, and we love the buzzword or the buzz phrase of critical thinking, right? Most people don't even think, never mind think critically, but critical thinking means you're thinking about your thinking. So cool, let me unpack. Why do I believe what I believe? How do I articulate that? How do I bring facts to the table? How do I emotionally regulate myself? If Ella comes to me and goes, I actually believe something totally different, and let me lay out my argument for that. Can I go, interesting. Am I brave enough to pull that string and potentially change my mind, right? So communication for me is a for all. Physiology is a for all. You're always going to be in your body. So understanding how to maintain physical health is a for all, fundamental. But when you start getting outside of that, it kind of becomes a for us or a for me sort of thing, right? Like I need to work with the people around me. I need to be willing to be brave enough to ask good questions, to pay attention, to adapt, a little bit of self-awareness. By the way, self-confidence comes from being competent in all of these things. I think all humans could use a dose of that because ultimately what ends up happening is you get to peace up here, peace of mind. And you know how my physical body, reacts to everything. And then after that, it's kind of off to the races. I mean, finances, sure, those work. But what about people that want to live off grid? So understanding financial things, and you can start to argue another layer of, financial literacy, learning about food and how to grow food. You can start to layer these things in, but I think ultimately that self-awareness, that self-confidence, the communication, my physical body, those are going to be the top deals that are kind of the for all. After that, it really starts to get into a for us. And so here's what I mean by that. I'm 44 now. I live on a farm in the mountains of North Carolina. We provide food to local restaurants. I have to know how to grow this food. Some of that is animals. I have to know how to process the animals in order to get them to the restaurants in restaurant quality. Like I need to know the standards around that. I've got my animals are partially fenced in the acreage that we have with electric fencing. Right now, I've got thousands and thousands and thousands of trees on my property. If a tree falls down and takes out that electric fence, that breaks the fence. Animals could potentially get out. I've got to be able to go lumberjack and go cut the tree up. I got to be able to splice the fence back together, make sure a charge comes back to it. Guess what I did not know how to do at 40 years of age? All of that. I lived in the suburbs in California, right? So I didn't need that specific knowledge. I need it now. And so the for me or for us knowledge is what do you need now based on your current circumstance? So it's kind of those fundamentals break down in those two categories. Fundamentals that everybody needs, which are few and far between, and then the fundamentals that you need because it's applicable to your life right now. That's a long-winded way of saying there's really only two ways I look at it. Hopefully that made sense.
I absolutely love that. One of the things that I've been learning recently is about this idea called the cognitive hypothesis. And it was basically this idea that like in the 90s, people thought that there were single or groups of traits that were most important in determining success, right? Right. And they boiled it down to the idea of IQ. Right. So like if we can train people to have high IQs, then they will be successful in life. And I think the fascinating thing, though, is as with anything scientific or research related, the questions that you ask are very important and the variables that you pay attention to are very important as well. And so what it seems like they did is they were defining success in a very, very particular type of way, right? So when you give your explanation of what do I need to learn for my circumstances right now, being and living at a farm,
Mhm.
right? Success is very different as opposed to what do I need to learn as, let's say, a lawyer or a doctor. And what I'm guessing that they probably did was define success as the top paying profession, something like this. But I do think that this is fascinating, like the idea of what is a successful human, right?
Right.
And what are the things that we are trying to get done?
Mhm.
And if you're painting success to be doctor, lawyer, right?
Mhm.
But you're not accounting for all of the other things that this potential doctor or lawyer are trying to think about, create, whatever it is.
Mhm.
Maybe, a doctor wants to create a business or maybe a doctor wants to create a farm. Like, are
Fools.
these the same traits and characteristics that create success in these other domains? And I think that's the idea of like, what does it mean to create a successful human? I think
Yeah.
you've nailed it whenever you're talking more so about the idea of being adaptable, about having an aim or some sort of a goal and saying, okay, I can actually take this on and succeed at
Right.
it.
That's right. And I appreciate that so much. And it's the understanding that success ultimately ends up being in the eye of the beholder, right? And that's the key component of sovereignty is that the individual decides how does she or how does he define success in all of these various arenas? What does success look like to me from a financial aspect? Because that may be very, very different than what it looks like to Ella. Like, what does sovereignty look to me financially? I don't want to have to answer to anybody. And that includes the government, by the way. Like, I don't want to answer to them either. Are there systems, are there financial strategies in place where I don't have to give them all of my money because they're taxing me out the wazoo? That's part of me being educated and being sovereign in that arena. And can I do that while simultaneously defining what health looks like for me? Right? What does fitness look like for me? I don't
Mm-hmm.
need to have a six pack to show off on Instagram. I want to not get sick. Like I want to be cognitively functioning at the highest level as humanly possible for myself, right? So that's what sovereignty looks like for me on the physical health side. So what information do I need and what practices do I need to apply? What experiences do I need to have? Hey, also successful as a human, I really would like to be able to get along with my wife extraordinarily well. I want her to actually like me to be around, right? And we want to make sure that our relationship is solid. What does that mean? What does it look like to have a good marriage according to us? What does that actually look and feel like? How do we define that for us? I want my children to love having dad around and look at dad as a leader and look at dad as somebody who is cool. What does that look like in those relationships for each individual? Right? These are the areas that I'm saying we've got to define it for ourselves and what it looks like, and then know how to acquire the skills, the knowledge, have the experiences so we at least keep moving further and further down that road until something changes and we redefine things or society helps redefine things. And then we need to be able to pivot. We need to be able to adapt and just continuously move forward. And hey, we have to do that until we're 6 feet under. Your ability to do that is ultimately that's education. I love what Naval Ravikant says. He says the ultimate test of education is really do you get what you want out of life? I mean, can't put it any more simply than that.
He's so brilliant. And I love whenever he boils things down to just such simple terms.
And that's the mark of a genius, and in so many ways, really the ability to just simplify something. It's not even necessarily a new idea. Sometimes it's just like we kind of already knew that, right? It's kind of the factory setting we were born with, and that's so much of what we try to do on our side is just go, how do we get you back? How do we get young people to maintain what we call those factory settings? Where you just kind of latch on to simple truths. A lot of them are pretty self-obvious. Like you just kind of always have known that. You just get trained out of it later, right? How do you maintain that curiosity and that wonder? And then as we're educating the adults, a lot of times it's not about getting them more information. It's about stripping away the BS and nonsense that they've added on top to get them back to that factory settings. Simplicity, man. Yeah, Naval does it maybe better than anybody.
One of the things that you said that I liked was according to us, right? And before we started recording, we were chatting about the idea of resources and choose your own adventure and how education is really becoming this dynamic, just like almost like an opportunity for people to choose exactly what it is that they
Mhm.
want. But I think that's the hard thing for a lot of parents and families right now is figuring out, okay, what do we want? if we're actually given all of the opportunities, if we're given all of the resources, and in the past, everybody told us what to want,
Oh,
what
yeah.
do we even want?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that's one of the hardest things. And that's something that nobody else can help you with, unfortunately. And that's one of the questions I get the most often. Well, how do I know what I want? I can't tell. If we went to a restaurant and we had a buffet in front of us, I can't tell you what your favorite food is. What do I tell you then? I tell you just to go start trying stuff. Go start trying the foods, right? Go start trying. You'll find out very quickly, ooh, I really like this, or ooh, this is gross. And then the more you try, the more you start to figure out your tastes as far as that goes. I really like this. I really like this. And actually, the more you try, the more you start to inherently get creative, right? Because you start to go, okay, I like this. I like this. I don't like this. But what if
Mm-hmm.
I took these two things I like? I love Mexican food and I love Korean barbecue. Gosh, what if I made Korean barbecue tacos? Right. And that's what we call that fusion in the culinary world. But in the reality, like that's what we build some really cool things in life around is our willingness to see these patterns and be able to put them together. But the creativity starts way down the road. It has to be you trying some things first. So that's what I tell people is like, look, get a general roadmap, a basic roadmap, a basic idea of where you think you want to go, and let's just start. Just start. It's not ready, aim, fire. It's fire, aim, ready. Fire, I mean, start. Okay, I'm going to pick, here we go. Now I'm getting a little more information, a little more feedback, and I'm either staying on this path or I'm going to adjust slightly and I'm going to keep going, right? And that's the aiming part of that. You never actually get to the ready. That's kind of the punchline of the whole thing because that's again 6 feet under at that point. But that's how it looks to move forward. People and what gets in our way is us. We get in our way. Our fear of doing it the quote unquote right way or somebody else's way or make it it's that. So yeah, all the resources are here at this point. We just have to make a decision, move forward, and be okay with pivoting and changing our mind. God forbid.
So in the years that you've done alternative education, what are some of the most common things that parents will bring up to you? Like the concerns that they have initially where they're like, "Hey, these are the reasons why I'm looking into this, but I'm really not sold yet."
The concerns are almost always the same, and they shouldn't even be concerns. And I don't mean that. And should is a hard word to use. It's a very hard thing to say a should or shouldn't for humans. But when I say something shouldn't be a concern, I usually say because it's one, either not really even relevant to the conversation or it's an irrational fear that shouldn't be there. It's a hard thing, but like the things that always come up are, well, what about socialization, right? If they're only going to be with a small number of people, shouldn't they be with thousands? Well, what about college? As if people who are home educated or didn't go the normal school route don't ever get a chance to go to college. Obviously not true. And in a lot of cases, it's actually easier for them. What about prom? I mean, it is the fears almost always come back to what about the religion of school? The conversations at a very high level is almost always, look, we see that school is not working for a lot of humans and that it might not have been designed for humans to begin with. We definitely don't think our young man or young woman should be there for, whatever, fill in the blank, right? But my worries, my fears, my concerns are all my connection emotionally to everything I just said isn't working. It is literally that silly on almost every conversation. This doesn't work. It is, I'll try to use an analogy, but it is a spouse who is being abused and not taken care of and recognizes every bit of it, but does not want to leave because there's at least there's a comfort in a known slavery versus the ambiguity of what freedom could be. And they'd rather stay in a known slavery than going into a future that is free.
Was that actually your experience? Because that's actually surprising to me that most people were entirely aware that it wasn't working. And like, was it just that?
To us at various campuses. Yeah, the vast majority of people, I think, will still point fingers, but they're not looking for, any alternative way to do it. They point fingers and then go, but this is what everybody does. I think the vast majority are still there. I'm speaking from the people who have come to us, but then struggle. Like, what is that experience? What are they saying? Why do they come to us in the first place? And then why do they struggle to stay there? It's that. But I think you're right. I think the vast
I
majority of people just go, well, no, this is the way to do it because it's the way it's always been done. I don't think, I think 90% of the population doesn't think through this at all, in my experience. At all.
Yeah. And I mean, you even had your own like light bulb moment where it's like, it's usually some sort of a problem that creates the questions inside of you. It's like, okay, something's happening. And
Sure.
then all of a sudden, now you're asking the question, you're like, okay, why is this happening? So, one of the things that we see a lot in our program is like school's just not working for the kid, or
Right.
like the flexibility that the family wants to have to chase their values
Right.
is not allowed or not available through the models that the normal kid would go through. Um, and so yeah, that's something that I've definitely seen. I think you're definitely right in the sense that um, I've had a lot of conversations with people where the conversation dies and ends as soon as we start talking about alternative schooling, just because it's easier
Mm-hmm.
than really asking the questions and asking, okay, what could be possible? Because I think that's the area that I feel like you and I are occupying right now. It's the what could be possible, like right now we're at this interesting point in the education space where people are asking lots of questions. We have a ton of resources and a ton of technology capacity. There are movements inside of most states for ESAs and just like all of these different things that are happening. And
Right.
people are asking questions, but that also opens the door to what more could be possible, right? Like what exists right now is not all that's going to exist. And that's actually extremely exciting.
And that is except, but there it is. So there's your mindset around that. That's exciting, right? You're able to look into the future and go, ooh, that's interesting. That's exciting. How do I get ahead of the puck? How do I go to where the puck is moving versus where the puck is? Right? You're willing to take that on. That is that mindset I was talking about earlier, where you're going, okay, I don't know what the future holds. And that's exciting. So why don't I try to figure that out and build something in the process and see where I can like be a part of what the future holds. Whereas the vast majority of people are like, I don't know what the future holds, and that scares the crap out of me. And because it scares me, I'm going to turn the other way. I'm going to pretend that this future doesn't exist. And I'm going to try to hold on tight no matter how fast the ship over here is sinking. I'm holding on for dear life because at least I know what it is. And that mindset difference that, I think either unlocks the genius and the potential inside of you or just keeps you locked up for the majority of your life. And by the way, I think this is a human nature thing. This is a question as old as time. Whether you are a believer in biblical history or not, there is a story about Egyptians being let out of slavery, being brought out by the creator himself. He brings the Egyptians out of slavery, and it doesn't take long before they're like, oh gosh, we're walking. We don't know how long we're going to be walking. We don't know where exactly we're going. So this leader you gave us, we want to kill him. You yourself, creator, you need you to shut up. Like, we don't want to hear your voice anymore. And as quickly as possible, we need to rebuild the confines of slavery that we came from in the first place because, gosh, at least it's comfortable. At least we know what it is. We don't like this ambiguity. So you can say that's a literal or a fictional account, but it illustrates a very real human condition.
Yeah, and to bring that to the ground level, like that is exactly what every single parent experiences whenever they decide whether or not they're going to take ownership, in a way, responsibility over their kids' education. It's like, okay, I know that there are constraints on this other type of education, but it's
Right.
easy and it's right there
Mhm.
and it's predictable. Like I can guess what is going to come out if I send my kid through this, as opposed to, if I'm trying to create this curriculum for my kid, or if I'm trying to choose between the best curriculums, or if I'm trying to pick and choose what should we put them into this semester, like maybe I'm going to make the wrong decision. That lack of certainty is so scary.
Yep. So they'd rather take certainty even if certainty sucks.
Well, what kind of advice would you give to parents? Because I feel like you being a parent yourself, like
Yeah.
recognizing that fear, like,
Yeah.
I don't want to mess my kid up.
Yeah, totally. So don't mess yourself up first. Like that's the biggest thing is you're not going to mess the kid up as long as you're being intentional. And by intentional, I mean you are doing your best to be the best version of yourself. A lot of times we get wrapped up in that fear of I'm going to mess my kid up when you know you're not doing the things you should do in the first place, right? I'm going to mess my kid up, but I know I'm not taking care of my health. I know I'm not pursuing my dreams. I know I'm not willing to take risks. I know I'm not working as hard as I could. I know I'm being lazy. I know I'm distracting myself. I know I'm going down the rabbit hole of all kinds of vices that aren't moving anybody forward. Fix that. Fix all of those. Start doing that. Because again, the most simple way to educate a young human is for you to be the adult who's leading by example. And you just simply bring them along. And I tell parents all the time, you've already done this, by the way. You've been doing this since day one. And I'll ask them because the majority of parents I talk to on a daily basis are, live in America or Canada. I get a lot from Australia. I mean, all over the world, but those are predominantly where I get people reaching out from. I go, okay, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, your kids speak English. And they're like, yeah, they speak English. I'm like, how did I know that? They're like, well, I speak English. Of course, right, exactly. Did you send them to school to learn to speak that, or did that? Well, no, they just saw what I was doing and they go, yep, exactly. Same way they learned to walk. They saw what you guys were doing. They started trying. They fell. You cheered on the failure, right? They started speaking. They said, they babbled, and you went, yeah, that's great. And you helped them through it. And now all of a sudden, you guys are having these full on conversations. Hey, guess what? All of your daily routines, all of your daily habits, all the things that you make normal in your house, as well as all the things that you don't allow in your house, that is becoming their life too. So you are literally transferring your way of life. So if you want to do it well, make sure you're doing it well for you first. And then who are you giving a nod to that you are also allowing to speak into their life? If we're talking about a transfer of a way of life, who else are you sending them to? Are you sending them to the government for 8 hours a day to let the government transfer its way of life into your children? And by the way, while they're there, it's other people you don't know and other kids you don't know that are all actively pushing. And then when they come home, they're on YouTube and YouTube is doing, and then they go on to video games and then video games. So how much are you leading by example? When parents start to look at the development of a human that way, that every other person they're interacting with or every other experience gets the opportunity to transfer its way of life to your child, it simplifies the process. Do I want this transferring its way of life to my child or not? Period.
Yeah, I love that view. So we were also chatting about the idea that like there are three primary options that parents feel like they have, right? They have private school as an option, they have public school as an option, and then they have homeschool as an option. And I mean, you have worked in the Acton Academy network, you have started Apogee. What other options are out there? Like, do you sit down with parents and talk about these things? Like, hey, there are actually more options than just these three.
The options are infinite. And I say that because it seems like there's three because we define those very specifically. Again, definition of terms, right? A lot of people will, so homeschool, parents across the board almost inherently go, oh, so I become the teacher, I use government approved curriculum, and I teach them subjects at home out of a textbook, and they take multiple choice. They're recreating school at home as defined by the conveyor belt models. Again, when you look at education as just moving your life forward, all of a sudden you see that things are infinite. So yes, there are brick and mortar places that are options that you can go to, but everything is educational. So sure, if you're looking at something that's labeled as a school, Acton's can be a great option. I think obviously our Apogee campuses, we're getting about 100 now, or I think that's a great option. Montessori schools and Steiner schools and Waldorfs. And I mean, you can name a number of these systems and that's great, but it doesn't mean it's going to be the end all be all or forever. When you are later on today, my 13-year-old will go work out at a ranch and then she has horse riding lessons after work. My other daughter has competitive gymnastics, and my son has kickboxing and Ninja Warrior. All of those are educational experiences. Every single one of them. All of those. None of them are labeled as a school, but those are all educational experiences. And then we're going to have conversations around the dinner table tonight, Socratic conversations around books they're reading. That's an educational experience. Out on the farm this morning, they all had chores, had to take care of. That was an educational experience. We had a well hut issue down in our pasture, and we weren't getting water out of some of the spigots down at the pasture. So we had to figure out what to do to fix it. That's an educational experience. We got to stop the limiting definition of what education is.
Yeah, I love, love, love that you mentioned that you are going to have a Socratic discussion at your dinner table. Is that something that y'all often do? And how do you promote that at home?
All the time, man, all the time. So reading is something that we have made enjoyable. We've made it fun. We've modeled it ourselves, right? But it's not ever something that was made to be a chore, made to be. So my kids are voracious readers. They love to read because reading is something almost everybody really likes if you maintain the factory settings. You get trained to hate it in school, but my kids never had to worry about that problem. So we made it fun. We made it exciting. We made diving into these stories interesting. We let them choose the things they want to read, and we provide options of great classic books that we know have a great story to it and some great, conversational topics. And so we'll like, what are you reading? What is going on? Ooh, that's crazy. Okay, what if you were that person? What if you heard what your sister was reading. What if you were that main character right there? What would happen? Like, what would you have done? Would you have made the same decision? Okay, it's that, right? Like we'll use those kind of things. And if we really want to get squirrely and not be open-ended, we can go, okay, let us put you in a scenario and we'll make both sides of the scenario equally as enticing or equally as awful. And you have to choose one, defend it. Those kind of conversations are fun. They're fun for everybody. It's fun for the whole family. Like we never run out of something to talk about. And it's that's how we run it. It's just consistent that way.
Is it hard to stay curious as a parent like that? Or what motivates you to ask these questions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I appreciate that. It's not hard to stay curious when you're not distracted, and that's not just a parent thing, that's a person thing. It's not hard for young people to stay super curious when we don't have a bevy of distractions in front of them. My kids are not distracted by, they don't have social media. They're not distracted by their own video games. They're not distracted by hours of YouTube and TV shows. Like they're not distracted by that. So they maintain their curiosity. Same thing on our side. I work like crazy, but even in my work, it's diving into curiosity and how can we make this better? Or how can this, ooh, this is an interesting trend. What do we do to capitalize on that? So my work is very much around curiosity and being curious around the people that I serve. How can I excite them to get them better? Gosh, man, that is another built-in thing. Parents are built-in curious about their kids. Like you want to know who they are. It's so fascinating. There's no better topic for a parent than their kids unless they're super distracted by other things and they're prioritizing other things. So as long as you just step into the love that's inherent there, man, it's not an issue to be curious about who they are and what are they going to do and what are they interested in and what are the questions they're going to ask and what are the those things, man, that's endless. It's an endless well.
I love that. Why do you think parents got to a point where they believed that they needed to outsource things or like they believed that they needed to rely on quote unquote experts for their children?
Yeah, it's systemically been a thing. It's culturally been something that systems have done a really good job of convincing us, right? So, and I say systems, and again, knowing that there are really good people who work in all of these systems. There are great people. So I'm not knocking the humans. The systems are designed to self-perpetuate, right? The systems are designed to preserve the system. So it has nothing to do with the people who are in it, because I think there are great humans there, right? But I think there's great humans that work at McDonald's too. My kids aren't going to go eat there because I don't believe in the product itself, right? So systems are designed to self-perpetuate. So we've done a really good job culturally of giving incentives, early on. We say things, sometimes it's just an emotional incentive. Well, we've got to get the kids out of a factory. Got to get them out of the factory. As child abuse, child labor is a bad thing, right? Whereas children actually really want to work and they always wanted to. And even when school became compulsory, you see children who were surveyed even back then, the vast majority of them were like, I want to go back to the factory. like that, I was actually doing something that mattered. Here, like this is driving me nuts and I'm bored and out of my mind, right? So we say things though that sound nice, that sound enticing, that sound like it's helping, it's moving things forward, and people start to believe that. And then there's the social pressure of, okay, well, if they believe it, I don't want them to be mad at me, so I'll have my kid do the same thing, or right. And so then you have these systems that take that social pressure and put all these buzzwords on top just to make sure the system remains. And eventually, over time, you've got everybody believing that you have to now outsource education to somebody else. They don't care that literacy rates dropped once schooling became compulsory. No, 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 no. I've got to send them somewhere or they'll never learn to read. I remember somebody saying something to the effect of it would only take one generation of sending kids to school at 18 months old before the entire population believed kids would not learn to walk unless they went to school to learn to walk. That's how gullible we are as humans if it's done over time and everybody else is doing it. Social conformity. So people don't think their kids will ever learn to read if they don't send them to school. Provably not the case, but they don't think that, right? And so people don't think they can learn at this point to be healthy because, well, what is the culture? Culture tells us you got to go to the expert, the doctor, right? Don't confuse your Google search with their years of medical. Well, who trained them on their medical advice? How do I know those people were right? What are they training them for? Are they training them for profit? Are they training them for knowledge? What are they training them for? And what if I come to the conclusion that I think differently than them in the first place? Like it's okay to it's okay to trust yourself if you're willing to do the work on the research. You don't have to trust a system that is designed to perpetuate itself. That you're not going to find all the health information in the world from a doctor and nobody else. You're not going to find all the answers to being educated from a teacher and nobody else. You're not going to find the answers to finding out who God is through a pastor and nobody else. System, 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 system.
I think that was very perfectly put. I like your comparisons to things like, religion, where you're not going to find one person that's going to have all of the answers. The truth exists. And what's interesting is that, and I think we've talked about this before, the idea that that we are experts on ourselves, right?
Right.
And like a parent, I was talking to Isaac about this in the last episode. I was asking him the question about, so somebody had come to me and they were asking about what we were doing at OpenEd. And they were asking, how do you know that a parent is going to choose what is best for their child? And Isaac flipped it on its head and he was like, a parent is the most incentivized person in the world to choose what is right for their child.
Bingo.
And I think that's exactly the point that you're making. It's like, not only is the parent the most incentivized, it's also that parent is also the closest to the child. So whenever it comes to paying attention and recognizing little signals or recognizing little things that tell you that something's off, a parent will know.
That's it. I mean, there's parents, and you probably had this experience too, where you go over to somebody's house and, there's a young person there who's maybe, 2 and they're learning to talk and they come down and they say something to you that just sounds like absolute, garbledy. You're like, well, I have no idea. But the parent's like, oh, yeah, no, it's almost time for dinner. And you're like, wait, how did you even decipher that? And it's like, well, I know them. I know what they're saying. I know what it sounds like when I know those. Yeah, man, nobody else does. The parent does. And so, what Isaac said is spot on. And I would always offer, the opposite for people because those kind of questions are what get people to actually think about their thinking. Again, that's critical thinking. It's how do you know the parent's going to choose what's best for their child? Well, how do you know the government is choosing what's best for each child? How do you know that this stranger over here is choosing what's best? And what's more likely, a stranger choosing what's best for somebody, a government choosing what's best for somebody, or that person's parent choosing what's best for somebody? 9 times out of 10, what do you think is going to make the most sense? And then people will tend to go to extremes. Well, some parents are just abusive drug addicts, and oh, sure, great, got it, cool. Overall, what are we really talking about here? Because we can use the extremes, right? That's not the norm to make our point, or we can really take a look, logically speaking, what makes the most sense. And then, of course, if there's extremes where you have somebody that's a really bad parent, of course, I want them to be able to go to somebody who's a better human, of course. Don't use an extreme to try to make a blanket statement for everybody. That's silly.
So I want to segue a little bit. So Apogee now is starting to come out with in-person different places for people to learn. Originally, it was a mentorship program, though.
Correct.
Why did you decide on mentorship? Like, what was the need that you saw or the gap to fill that you
Yeah.
wanted to fill?
The need was really everything that we've been talking about here. So it is people going, okay, I don't know what to do. Okay, well, we'll give you a general roadmap of things that we think are these meta skills that we're talking about, right? We're talking about communication and relationships and all this. Okay, cool. So we'll give you a roadmap. And by the way, it's not a roadmap of just Matt and Tim Kennedy think this would be cool. It was a roadmap of like, hey, ninjas in this area, that this is their field of expertise. What do they think you should be doing as a young person to gain these skills, to acquire these skills? What experiences do you think they should have? So if we'll give you those experiences where we can all start tackling those, but then we can walk alongside you. So as we get your feedback on what that looks like for you, we go, okay, cool. So what are the outcomes now? And did that change anything for you? And let's reflect on that together. And what could next steps potentially look like? What could those be? Right. So it's a combination of a roadmap. So they're not choosing from the buffet going, I'm overwhelmed and I don't know how to make a choice. It gives them something to start working on, but then we can come alongside them. And it's not just us coming alongside them. We're bringing in outside mentors every single week who are giving them other patterns to pay attention to, and they're giving them other ideas as well. So it's a focused attention on try this, maybe adapt here, to ultimately get to the point where we're going, cool, who are you? Where do you want to go? What do you want? The best we can muster as far as giving them help in terms of direction and skills to get to that direction faster.
I love that. You mentioned experience. This is the last question that I have for you. So, a lot of the emphasis that we've been talking about here is experience and common sense and your ability to problem solve, right? And a lot of the ways that I would say regular traditional school teaches children is through books, right? It's not the experiential knowledge that you're gaining, right? It is the almost conceptual knowledge that you're gaining. So you're learning how to, let's say, work an electric fence, or you're learning how animals should be, but you're
Sure.
not actually seeing it and observing it. What do
Right.
you think that does to a child to not be able to experience it, but to learn about it only conceptually?
There can be some benefit there. It can still pique interest. It is possible to pique interest that way, but it's also giving a false perception potentially of what that interest is. It's kind of like going to, gosh, I hate to use this extreme example, but it's what comes out. It's like going to pornography to go, okay, well, this is what relationship, okay, that may make me interested in girls, but that's not necessarily what you want a relationship to look like, right? So it's like given this false perception of what something is versus what it really is. So it's like
Yeah.
it'll get you interested in some great things just going through the books, but it's also not giving you the real understanding. And I actually use sports as an analogy all the time. And pick your favorite sport. You don't go, okay, basketball. My favorite sport's basketball. Cool. Or it does take 12 years and just have you memorize all of the stats for the best players of all time. And let's memorize all the different defensive schemes, and let's, organize all these different, the triangle offense. I want you to learn the triangle offense from an academic standpoint and never go pick up a ball. We'll do that for 12 years with a kid and then theoretically tell them, look, man, you're really good at basketball. And they're like, I've never actually even picked one up. I understand there should be rotation. My elbow should be underneath here. I should follow through. But I've never picked one up. Are they going to be good at basketball? No, absolutely not. They've got all the theory in the world, but they're not going to be good at it. And they really don't know if they like playing it because they've never played it, right? That's the best way to learn is go play, go try. And then all of a sudden, the academic side of it makes sense. Now, when I'm learning about follow through and okay, that makes sense because I've actually done it. And I've seen that if I just go like this, it doesn't work. But if I actually flick my wrist, okay, that's great. Right. So I can actually compare the two because I've done it. So that us getting stuck in theory, it's an exercise in inefficiency at best. And I've had plenty of experiences where and I've spoken about this on a number of podcasts, but I had an MBA professor at a prestigious Ivy League university telling me that, my business models weren't going to work and my businesses were making seven figures and he'd never started a business. He was telling me that my parenting styles, were going to be dangerous and I had, 7 and 9-year-olds that were buying horses. My daughter's 13 now. She's written 2 books that are over 400 pages long. They're the most mature young people I've ever met in my life. And he was telling me this from his ivory tower, and he also had no kids, So it's like, you got to take things with a grain of salt. Somebody that's never done it, but telling you exactly how to do it, I can only go so far with that.
I love that. This has been so much fun, such an enlightening conversation. And you are definitely one of the first people whenever I was like, okay, I want to learn about the space. I want to understand who is involved and also what they're thinking, where are they looking to in terms of like problem solving, but also in terms of like the basics, like what is education? Like how are these people defining things? How are these people looking at this space and these problems? You're one of the first people that I was like, I definitely need to talk to you. So thank you so much for your time and for all of your wisdom.
Oh, thank you. Honor is absolutely mine. And thank you for the work that you guys are doing too. Huge fans. And we got a whole lot of people to kind of shake a little bit and get them to start thinking again. And your work really matters in that space too. So thank you for what you're doing as well.
Yeah, and maybe one day we can do something together.
Man, be my pleasure.
I love it.